Jason Hale adjusted his pack and exhaled a visible breath into the crisp Montana air. The late October chill had settled over the pines, and most of the tourists had vanished with the summer. That was the part he liked best: solitude, the way the silence wrapped around everything like an untouched film. He'd been sent to survey the Elk Ridge Trail, a place closed for environmental hazards, though the reports were vague. Officially, it was landslides. Unofficially, locals whispered about missing hikers, strange guttural cries at night, and once, the mutilated corpse of a deer found hanging upside down by its hind legs, skin peeled like a banana. Jason didn't buy into tall tales. Nature had enough horror without ghosts. But just 30 minutes in, something already felt off. No birds, no wind, just dead stillness. That's when he saw it, pressed deep into the cold soil at the edge of a dried creek bed. One footprint, 5 long toes, almost human, but far too wide. The heel sunk so deep he could estimate weight, maybe 280 pounds. Jason crouched, eyes narrowing. He'd tracked bears before. This wasn't a bear. It looked human, but no human foot was shaped like that. His breath caught. Something moved behind the trees. A swift flicker in his peripheral vision. He stood, alert. "Hello?" he called out. Only his own voice came back, hollow, as if the woods refused to carry it. The print led him away from the trail. Jason should have radioed it in, standard protocol. But something pulled him deeper. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was pride. Maybe, deep down, it was the kind of curiosity that kills cats and humans alike. He moved slowly, noting every crushed fern and snapped twig. The tracks continued through thick pine and curved toward an old hunter's path, long since overgrown. Then he caught it. Faint movement again. A silhouette, low to the ground, crawling on all fours, gone in a blink. His heart picked up speed. "Hey, are you hurt?" he shouted. Silence. He turned in circles. His hand gripped the handle of his machete, not to attack, just to feel something solid. The further he went, the more it felt like the forest was swallowing sound. No birds, no bugs, no crunch of leaves under his boots. The air grew colder, and a sharp, wet stink started to hang around, like a mixture of sweat, rot, and something wild. It wasn't a predator's scent. It smelled human. By the 4th hour, Jason was nearly ready to turn back, until he saw it. A shack half buried in the overgrowth. It was old, rotting, but modified. Its door was reinforced with rusted bolts and a thick metal chain. Someone wanted it shut tight. Against what? He stepped closer, flashlight scanning the wood. Carved across the door in jagged, uneven scratches were the words, "It came from under." Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rot and sweat. Jason choked on the smell. The shack had once been a hunter's cabin. Now it was something else. Torn blankets, broken tools. And then he saw them. Bones, scattered beneath the floorboards, piled in corners. Small bones, rib cages, finger joints. Some were charred, others gnawed. He turned to leave but stopped. A small wooden box sat beneath a shelf. Inside were photos, old Polaroids. One showed a young man smiling, covered in dirt, next to a trap he'd built. Another showed him later, skinny, eyes sunken, face smeared in blood. On the back was scribbled, "No longer me." Jason stumbled out, hands shaking. He made camp early, shaken, His tent sat near a cluster of moss-covered stones, and he built a fire despite the dense canopy. That night, sleep refused to come. The air around him felt wrong, like something was waiting. At 12:37 a.m., it came, a scream, high, ragged, tearing through the forest like metal against bone. Jason leapt from his tent, heart slamming. He fumbled for his flashlight and ran toward the sound, drawn by instinct and dread. It led him to a sinkhole, almost invisible in the dark. He shone his light into the void. Nothing. Then a breath, gurgling, raspy, the sound of fingers scraping stone. Then silence. Jason stumbled backward, breath ragged. Something had crawled up there once. Maybe was still down there. He backed away slowly, too afraid to run. At first light, Jason tried to leave. His map, his compass, both pointed the same direction, but after walking for 2 hours, he arrived at the exact same clearing. The forest looped. Or maybe something else looped him. That's when he noticed the trees. They had markings, long vertical gouges, claw marks, but not from a bear. Too wide, too clean, fresh. As if someone or something was marking territory. He set up another camp reluctantly, and that night, as he sat quietly by a barely glowing fire, he saw it at the edge of the tree line, watching, pale, naked, crawling low like a beast, but it had eyes, human eyes. Jason whispered to himself, "That's not possible." Then it moved, swiftly, silently, disappearing into the trees. Jason moved fast the next morning. He didn't care about gear or evidence anymore. He just wanted out. The trail was unrecognizable. Branches had fallen overnight. Too many, too deliberately. The forest felt like it was building walls. Then suddenly, the ground vanished beneath him. He fell 6 feet into a pit, crashing hard. Pain tore through his shoulder. The walls were lined with sharpened stakes, many stained brown. He'd missed being impaled by inches. Above, the forest spun. A figure looked down at him. Sunken eyes, bloody teeth, skin pulled tight over a skeletal face. It hissed. Jason screamed. He scrambled up the wall, slipping, tearing his palms. He pulled himself out just in time to see another shape moving fast between trees. And another, and another. They were circling, hunting. Jason's last flare lit the forest in a deep, haunting red. The things screamed, not in fear, but rage. They recoiled, but only for seconds. He ran blindly, his lungs burning, arms torn by thorns. His clothes clung to him with sweat and blood. Then, headlights, a truck, real, human. Jason collapsed onto the road as the ranger skidded to a stop. Later, in the hospital, his words were dismissed. Hallucination, dehydration, delirium. There was no shack on the satellite scans. No bones were recovered. And yet, Jason moved out of state. He never entered the woods again. But some nights, when the wind howls and the air turns still, he dreams of sunken eyes and the words carved in wood. It came from under. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend in the hills. Jason and Claire had been together for 7 years, and after months of work stress and emotional distance, a retreat to the woods seemed like the perfect solution. They booked a remote Airbnb cabin in the Sierra Nevada range, one that promised isolation, fresh air, and no phone signal. But when the ranger found their abandoned SUV, parked crookedly off a dirt path 3 days later, with the keys still in the ignition and both front doors wide open, something felt deeply off. The ranger, a retired army veteran named Doug Reiner, stood by the vehicle, squinting into the trees. The air smelled wrong. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, but there was a faint smear of something dark across the windshield. And worse, strange, human-like footprints trailed away from the vehicle, barefoot, large, uneven, not toward the cabin, but deeper into the woods. Sheriff Amelia Grant had seen her fair share of missing person cases, but this one was different. She stood at the edge of the path where the SUV was found, arms folded, staring at the forest like it might blink first. What kind of person walks barefoot into freezing terrain, leaving behind everything? Search teams combed the woods, calling out names, using dogs, drones, even infrared scanners. But something kept interfering. GPS signals scrambled, batteries drained abnormally fast. And the dogs, they whined, refused to enter certain sections of the woods, ears pinned back, tails between their legs. It was like they sensed something that didn't want to be found. Then, on the second night of searching, one of the volunteers, a college kid named Eli, came back to camp, pale and shivering. He'd seen something, he stammered. A figure crouched behind a tree, watching him. It wasn't an animal, he whispered. It had a face, but not one like ours. The next morning, a team finally reached the cabin Jason and Claire had rented. It looked untouched from the outside, but the inside told a different story. Furniture was overturned, blood smeared the wall near the door. In the fireplace lay charred remains of photographs and something else, something that looked like bones, not big enough to be human. Maybe a small animal, or something else. Under the bed, someone found a torn, half-burned notebook. Claire's handwriting. The last entry read, "Something's out there. We heard it again last night. Scraping along the cabin walls, growling, but it didn't sound like a bear. Jason says he saw eyes in the window, yellow, watching us. I want to go home. I think we're being hunted." Grant closed the notebook slowly, her fingers trembling. Her deputy muttered, "What the hell lives out here?" 5 days after the couple went missing, a man stumbled out of the forest, filthy, naked, covered in scratches and dried blood. It was Jason, or what was left of him. He couldn't speak at first. He just curled into a ball on the hospital bed, eyes darting toward shadows. When he finally talked, his voice cracked with fear. He spoke of being taken, of being dragged through the underbrush by something human but wrong, taller than any man he'd seen, skin like bark, movements like an animal's, eyes glowing with something ancient. "They live out there," he kept saying. "Not one, a whole tribe, like people who never stopped hunting. They don't wear clothes, they don't talk, but they're smarter than we are. They set traps, they mimic voices. They waited until we were asleep." He broke down crying. "Claire, they took her. I heard her screaming for hours." Local historians came forward with whispers of old stories, tales of settlers disappearing, of entire camps vanishing without a trace. There had always been rumours about a cursed trail beyond the foothills, one that locals avoided, a place the native tribes once called the Hollow of Teeth. Grant drove out there herself one night. She wasn't supposed to, but she had to see it. Alone in the patrol car, headlights piercing the fog, She reached a crude stone marker nearly swallowed by undergrowth, symbols etched into its surface. Warnings, maybe. Then she saw them in her mirror. Shapes, barely human, darting between trees. Watching. She didn't get out of the car. She turned back, heart racing, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her back. Since that night, strange reports came in weekly. Hikers missing, drones disappearing, campfires found still burning, with no one around. Locals began whispering about the wild ones, and more than one family quietly sold their land and moved away. Jason, meanwhile, never fully recovered. He stayed in a psychiatric facility under surveillance, but one night he vanished. The cameras caught nothing, no signs of escape, just gone. The only clue was a single fingerprint smeared in dried mud across the inside of his window, but it wasn't his. It was larger and had 6 distinct ridges, not 5. Sheriff Grant eventually retired early, haunted by what she had witnessed. "They're out there," she once told a local journalist. "Not in fairy tales, not in horror movies. Right there in our woods. And they're watching, waiting. We just pretend they don't exist because it's easier than facing the truth. But not everyone can pretend." One last note was found in her old office desk after she left. Scrawled hastily on a torn map of the forest, it simply read, "We are not alone. We never were. They never left." The first time I heard about Granger Wood, I was 10. My uncle would gather us around a crackling campfire in the backyard, and with a cigarette clenched between his fingers and a beer always nearby, he'd spin tales meant to chill our bones. The scariest one was about them, the people who never came back from war, who crawled into the forest to forget who they were. He said they went wild. Not wolves, not monsters, worse. Humans stripped of everything human. I didn't believe him, of course. I was a kid. But last fall, I found myself driving near that very forest, trying to get home from a job in northern Vermont. A landslide had blocked the main highway, and my GPS rerouted me through an older road that sliced right through Granger Wood. At first, I didn't even connect the name. Just another road, but as soon as the trees started to thicken and the sun dipped behind the hills, I felt it. That old childhood fear came crawling back like a buried infection. The paved road gave way to gravel, then dirt. I passed a half-toppled sign, hidden under ivy, that read, "Private property, turn back." It was nailed to a tree, as if placed in a hurry. I should have turned around, but the gas gauge was dipping low, and I was nearly out of cell signal. I thought 20 minutes of woods, then I'm back on the highway. I'll be fine. The forest swallowed the road completely. Trees leaned inward, their blackened limbs tangled above like claws clutching the sky. The deeper I went, the more unnatural it felt. No birds, no insects. Just that vacuum of sound, like everything knew not to make noise here. I slowed when I saw something up ahead, a shack, partially collapsed, covered in moss and rot. It sat about 20 feet off the road, crooked, like a dying animal. I didn't stop, just glanced. But I saw something inside, a movement, quick and jerky, like a twitch. Then it vanished. 10 minutes later, it happened. A loud crack, like a whip, and the car lurched sideways. I cursed and coasted to a stop. The front left tire had blown out. I stepped out, instantly shivering in the cold, trying to calm my nerves. I popped the trunk and began digging for the spare when I heard it. "Need help?" The voice came from the trees. Deep, flat, not friendly, not aggressive, just empty. I turned slowly. A man was standing at the edge of the forest, shirtless, barefoot, pale and smeared with dirt. His hair was wild, his beard matted, and his eyes, they were the worst part, glazed, hollow. They weren't looking at me, but through me. I stammered, "No, I'm okay, just changing the tire." He tilted his head as if trying to understand the sentence. Then, after a pause that felt far too long, he smiled. "People get lost out here, lot of them." My fingers fumbled on the wrench. He didn't move, just stood there sniffing once. His gaze dropped to my hands, then the tire, then my face again. A few agonizing minutes passed as I finished bolting on the spare, my heart pounding. When I looked up again, he was gone. I jumped into the car and drove, faster than I should have on that dirt road. The trees blurred by, but the path ahead didn't make sense. It kept curving in impossible ways. And suddenly I saw it again. The shack. The exact same shack. I had gone in a loop. This time, the door to the shack was open. Wide open. I tried turning the car around. As I did, movement exploded from the trees. 3 figures dashed across the road. One slammed their hand on my hood. I screamed. They were all like the man before. Barefoot, wild-eyed, their clothes little more than rags, their skin smeared in mud and blood. One of them crouched on all fours and stared at me, his jaw hanging slack. The other 2 circled slowly. They were watching, studying. I hit the gas and swerved around them. I drove blindly for what felt like hours. No road signs, no turn-offs, just more and more of the same damned forest. I didn't even realize I was crying until I could taste the salt. Then I saw it, dim lights through the trees. A house. It was a small farmhouse with a flickering porch light. I barreled into the driveway, stumbled out and pounded on the door. After several agonizing seconds, it creaked open. An old man stood there with a rifle in his hands. His eyes scanned me for a full 5 seconds before he said, "Granger?" I nodded, barely able to speak. He opened the door wider and said, "Come in, lock it, now." Inside, it was cramped, cluttered, but warm. I collapsed into a chair, trembling. The man, Howard, poured me a cup of coffee and asked what I'd seen. I told him everything. He just nodded, grimly. "They live out there," he said quietly. "Used to be men, veterans, some of them. Others, just runaways. The woods did something to them, or maybe they did it to themselves. Now they don't talk right, don't think right. They've made the forest their home, and they don't like outsiders." I asked him if they were dangerous. "They don't use guns. They don't need to," he muttered. "They watch you. They wait until you're alone, stranded. They break you slowly. You'll see them in the corner of your eye, hear them scratching on your windows. They'll follow you home, and once you've seen them, they remember you." That night, I barely slept. I heard sounds. Footsteps outside. A whistle so faint it could have been the wind. But Howard sat in his rocker by the window, shotgun across his lap, eyes never closing. In the morning, he walked me to my car. As I climbed in, he handed me a piece of paper. "If you ever think you're being followed, burn this. It's old medicine. Might give you time to run." I didn't understand. I didn't ask. I just drove. Back home, I couldn't stop checking over my shoulder. I started hearing tapping on my windows at night. Once, I found a muddy footprint outside my bedroom, barefoot, wide-toed. I convinced myself it was paranoia, until last week, when I opened the trunk. There was something nestled beside the spare tire, a lock of human hair, tied with something like animal gut. I dropped it, heart hammering, and backed away. Then I saw what was beneath it, a smudged photo of me, sitting in my car, taken from the trees. They had been closer than I'd ever known.